Welcome to Demon Sleep. I'm here to help you unwind tonight. If you enjoy this space, feel free to like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It makes this feel like a shared night across the world. These stories are different and I'm glad you're here. Dim the lights, let the room settle, and let's begin. Story 1: Beneath What Was Left Behind. Gabriel Reyes had learned to brace himself before stepping into places like this. There was always a smell that hit first, sharp chemicals layered over reheated meals, softened by something faintly human and deeply unsettling. It wasn't illness exactly. It was the scent of time wearing people down. The building ahead of him wore a bright, almost playful coat of pink, as if color alone could disguise what waited inside. Even the ramp at the entrance felt wrong. Long, narrow, guiding bodies in one direction, with no promise of return. He stopped beside his car and opened the folder again, though he already knew every detail by heart. 5 women, a year and a half, neighborhoods forgotten by city maps and politicians alike. Each body found arranged with care that felt deliberate, almost reverent. Hands, rope, silence. Then nothing. No more deaths. No arrest. Just an empty space where answers should have been. The file had been stamped inactive decades ago, but one name had refused to fade. Rutherford Crane. 87 now, 3 years into assisted living. The only person who ever claimed to see the man who walked away from the third crime scene. Back then, no one believed him. He'd been drunk. It was late. His words lacked shape and certainty. The case moved on without him. Now, with funding drying up and old investigations being quietly buried, Reyes knew this visit wasn't routine. It was a final reach into the dark, hopping something still breathed there. Inside, the building fought hard to appear harmless. Soft paintings that meant nothing. Chairs designed to be wiped clean without leaving a mark. A fish tank so spotless it felt staged, like a prop meant to reassure rather than entertain. Normalcy pressed in from every angle, almost too aggressively. A woman rose from behind the front desk, her silver hair sculpted into something confident and immovable. Her smile arrived right on time. "You must be Detective Reyes," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Nancy Morrison. We spoke earlier." Her grip was steady, professional, the kind of handshake meant to inspire trust. "I should prepare you," she added as they started down the hall. "Ruddy hasn't been having the easiest stretch. His memory slips more each week. Sometimes he forgets where he is entirely." Reyes nodded. He knew this terrain well. Memory didn't vanish all at once. It fractured, leaving behind strange survivors. "Does he still recall the 70s? Reyes asked. Morrison paused, then smiled faintly. "That's the strange cruelty of it. Yesterday, he couldn't recognize me at all. But ask him about his childhood. He'll walk you through his paper route from the early 50s like he just finished it this morning." They moved past posters promising joy, purpose, tomorrow. Handrails followed them like quiet guides. Room numbers crept upward until they stopped at one marked 247. Morrison lifted her hand and knocked softly, as if sound itself needed permission to enter. "Ruddy," she said gently, opening the door. "Someone's here to see you." Reyes stepped forward, aware that whatever waited inside that room might be fragile, distorted, or the last living echo of a truth the world had chosen to forget. The figure by the window barely matched the face Reyes had memorized from old case files. Time had stripped Rutherford Crane down to bone and angles, skin hanging loosely as if it no longer quite belonged to him. His hair, thin and snow-white, was combed with deliberate care, too careful to be accidental. Habit or pride, maybe both. But his eyes told a different story. Pale blue, awake, sharp. They locked onto Ray's the moment he stepped inside, weighing him with an intensity that felt unsettlingly present. "Mr. Crane," Ray's said softly, moving closer without haste. He noticed the way the old man's fingers dug into the wheelchair's armrests, knuckles pale. "I'm Detective Ray's. I was hoping we could talk about something from many years ago." Crane's head angled slightly, the motion quick, precise, like an animal listening for danger. When he spoke, his voice sounded thin with age, yet carried surprising force. "Time," he said, choosing each word carefully, "does strange things in this place. One moment I'm 12, the next I'm 30, and sometimes I'm not me at all." Behind them, Morrison rested a gentle hand on Ray's shoulder. "I'll be nearby at the nurse's station," she said quietly. "Door stays open. Rules are rules." Once she left, Ray's pulled a chair closer, careful to keep his distance measured and respectful. He switched on the recorder and set it between them. "I'm looking into a series of deaths from the early 70s, Ray said. "San Diego. The records say you might have seen something important." Crane's attention drifted past him out the window, where the ocean stretched endlessly beyond trimmed hedges and quiet walkways. Seconds passed, then more. Ray's wondered if the moment had slipped away entirely. Then Crane spoke again. "The girl with the red shoes." A jolt ran through Ray's. "Tell me about her." "She was heading home," Crane murmured, his voice growing distant, hollow, as though he were reciting from somewhere far behind his eyes. "Late shift, the diner on University. Wore red sneakers, cheap ones, canvas, but so bright they looked wrong, like drops of blood scattered on the pavement." His hands began to move, fingers curling and uncurling in his lap. "It was near the tracks in Southcrest. Lights out. Street swallowed sound. She heard someone behind her, but she didn't look back." A faint, knowing pause. "Smart girls never do." Ray's leaned in, heart pounding. "The third victim, Carmen Valdez, found near the old trolley line, employed at a diner. None of the reports mentioned red shoes, not once." "What did you see that night, Mr. Crane?" Ray's asked. Crane's eyes snapped back to him, suddenly razor sharp, the fog gone in an instant. "Are you asking what I saw?" he said slowly, a thin smile creeping to the edges of his mouth. "Or what I remember?" Ray swallowed. "Is there a difference?" The smile lingered, uneasy, unreadable, not kind, not cruel, just knowing. "Oh yes," Crane whispered. "There's all the difference in the world." "Not unpleasant either," Crane continued softly. "Memory is like a garden detective. You choose what to plant, you water it, you watch it grow, but weeds always find a way in. And sometimes," his lips twitched, "you have to tear out the most beautiful flowers because they're growing where they shouldn't." Ray's made a quiet note. Metaphors weren't unusual in patients like Crane, but there was intention in the way he spoke. This didn't feel like confusion drifting into poetry. It felt measured. "Tell me about the man," Ray said. Crane didn't hesitate. Medium build, not short, not tall, 5'10", maybe a little more. Dark hair, brown, not black, wore a work jacket. The kind men use when they don't want to be noticed. The description slid perfectly into place, mirroring the old witness statement Ray's had memorized years ago. But the delivery had changed. The fog was gone. In its place was clarity, cold, deliberate. "He moved carefully," Crane went on. "Quiet steps for someone his size. He knew where to place his feet." "Did you see his face?" Ray's asked. Silence stretched too long. Then Crane laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't joyful. It sounded like dry leaves crushed under a shoe. His face, Crane repeated, amused. Detective, you're chasing the wrong thing. Reyes held his ground. Then tell me what I should be asking. Crane's smile sharpened. You should be asking why I was there, why I was walking down that street at that exact moment. His laughter faded, but the smile stayed. You should be asking why I remember her shoes so vividly, when your reports say she wasn't wearing any when they found her. The room seemed to cool. Reyes felt his stomach tighten. The report doesn't mention missing shoes. Crane leaned back, never breaking eye contact. Garden, detective. Sometimes you remember what you planted. Sometimes you remember what you pulled out of the ground. Before Reyes could respond, the moment shattered. Medication time, Mr. Crane. A nurse announced brightly from the doorway, rolling in a cart stacked with pills and juice boxes. Crane's posture collapsed. The sharpness drained from his eyes as if someone had flipped a switch. Confusion replaced calculation. Are we having lunch soon? He asked, voice thin and small. I'm starving. The nurse smiled kindly, already sorting pills. Lunch was 2 hours ago, Ruddy, but I'll get you a snack. 2 hours, Crane frowned, genuinely distressed. That can't be right. I just woke up from my nap. Reyes watched, unsettled. The man who had calmly dissected a murder scene moments ago was now scanning the room like a lost child. My mother should be here soon, Crane murmured. She doesn't like me eating alone. Reyes swallowed. Mr. Crane, he said gently, knowing the moment, whatever it had been, was already slipping back beneath the surface. We were talking about 1974, Reyes said carefully. About the girl with the red shoes. Crane looked at him blankly, as if the words meant nothing at all. Do I know you? He asked. I'm Detective Reyes, Reyes replied. We were discussing some old cases. Crane swallowed his pills without protest, washing them down with apple juice. I don't remember much anymore, he said quietly. The doctors say that's normal. Still, it scares me. Feels like there are doors in my head I'm not allowed to open. The nurse finished her routine and promised to return later, then left the room. Reyes stayed seated, watching, hoping for the sharpness to return. It didn't. Crane's eyelids drooped, his chin sinking to his chest as sleep claimed him swiftly and completely. Reyes gathered his recorder and notes and stepped back into the hallway. At the nurse's station, Morrison was updating a chart. How did it go? She asked. Unsettling, Reyes said. He mentioned details about a crime scene that weren't in the official reports. Morrison nodded, unsurprised. False memories happen often with this disease. The brain fills in gaps with things that feel absolutely real. Sometimes those details are incredibly specific. Or sometimes, Reyes said, they're remembering things no one bothered to write down. That's possible, she conceded, though her tone stayed cautious. But Ruddy's condition has worsened a lot. When he first arrived, he could debate politics, play chess, solve puzzles. Now he confuses me with his sister, and she passed away decades ago. Reyes thanked her and left, Crane's words trailing him all the way back to his car. Sometimes you remember what you harvested. That night, Reyes covered his dining table with old folders and photographs, chasing a detail everyone else had ignored. The investigation from the 70s was diligent for its time, but crude by modern standards. Grainy black and white photos, handwritten notes, evidence logs that felt almost ceremonial. Then he found it. A follow-up report, filed 3 days after Carmen Valdez had been discovered. A patrol officer had recovered a pair of red canvas sneakers from a trash bin 6 blocks away. Clean, undamaged, logged into evidence, and quietly dismissed as unrelated. Ray stared at the page, the pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. Crane hadn't imagined the shoes. He had known exactly where they ended up. Ray stared at the photograph until his eyes ached. The image was decades old, grainy and unforgiving. Under the harsh flash, the red canvas sneakers looked pale, almost colorless, ghosts of what they once were. And yet Crane had described them perfectly, too perfectly. How could he have known? Ray's opened his laptop and pulled up the care facility's visitor records. The list was painfully short. A nephew who appeared twice a year out of obligation. One former coworker who'd stopped by once years ago. And a volunteer from the local library who never returned after Crane grew restless and angry during reading sessions. None of them had any path to sealed homicide files. Ray's poured himself a stiff drink and returned to the case photos. 5 women. Every body positioned with intention, as if the killer had lingered, adjusting, arranging, making sure something invisible to everyone else felt right. The profiler back then had painted a familiar picture. Controlled rage, resentment turned inward, a methodical mind hiding behind an ordinary face. Someone smart, someone patient, someone who blended in. Someone who didn't make mistakes. His phone buzzed on the table. For a moment he considered ignoring it. He thought of his daughter, Alina. 2 missed messages. Something about holiday plans, about her mother wanting to talk. Normal life knocking softly, asking to be let back in. Instead, he let it ring. Working late again? Maria Santos asked. She'd been his partner long enough to hear the answer before he spoke. I talked to Crane today, Reyes said. The witness, he knew things he shouldn't. The Alzheimer's patient, she replied flatly. Please don't tell me you're hanging this case on a man who doesn't know what year it is. He gave details that were never public, Reyes said. Details only someone at the scene or someone involved would know. Silence hummed on the line. Gabriel, Santos said carefully, you know I trust your instincts, but this is dangerous ground. People with dementia can sound frighteningly clear when they're filling in gaps. Their brains convince them it's real. That's what everyone keeps saying, Reyes replied, and maybe everyone's right. What exactly did he tell you? Reyes walked her through it all. The red shoes, the location, the way Crane spoke about memory as something cultivated and something harvested. When he finished, Santos exhaled slowly. Okay, she said, that's unsettling. But there are explanations, old news articles, rumors. Someone could have mentioned the shoes years ago, or she hesitated. He might know more than he's admitting. Ray stared again at the photograph on the table. Or more than he's forgotten. Just promise me one thing, Santos said. Don't let this case start talking back to you. Reyes didn't answer right away. The room felt too quiet, the past too close. I think it already is, he said. Promise me you'll handle this like a scientist, Santos said before hanging up. Not like a man chasing closure. Reyes agreed, though he wasn't sure he believed himself. Once the call ended, he returned to the files with sharper discipline. If Crane wasn't a witness, then Reyes needed to understand who he was when the killings happened. Not impressions, facts. He built a parallel timeline, murders on one side, a life on the other. Records told a quiet but revealing story. For nearly 3 decades, Rutherford Crane had worked as a maintenance supervisor for the city's school system. His job sent him all over San Diego, often after hours, when classrooms were empty and streets were quiet. He knew which doors stuck, which lights were broken, which alleys stayed dark. In 1974, Crane had lived in City Heights, less than 3 miles from where Carmen Valdez was found. Rays marked the map, then again, then again. Every victim fell within a tight circle, no more than 7 miles from Crane's apartment. He poured another drink and returned to the photographs, forcing himself to look without assumption, without hope, without fear. The bodies hadn't been discarded, they had been placed, arms straight, legs aligned, eyes gently shut. If not for the marks at their throats, they might have appeared at rest. There was intention there, patience, control. Reyes reached for his phone to call Santos back. It rang first. Golden Sunset Care Facility. Detective Reyes, this is Nancy Morrison, the voice said, tight with strain. I'm sorry to call so late, but something happened with Mr. Crane. Reyes glanced at the clock. 11:47 p.m. What kind of something? He's been awake for hours, Morrison said. Asking for you, not the police. You, he keeps talking about the garden. Says he needs to tell you something before it's too late. We've tried to calm him, but he's escalating. I'm on my way, Reyes said, already grabbing his keys. The facility looked wrong at night. Its bright colors felt dishonest beneath harsh fluorescent lights. The halls echoed with sounds daylight concealed, the steady hiss of machines, distant sobs, murmurs from rooms where sleep refused to come. Orderlies drifted past like shadows, efficient and silent. Morrison met him at the door, hair undone, nerves fraying. We moved him to the common room, she said. He was upsetting his roommate. Just so you know, he's clearer than I've seen him in months, but also intense. They walked through darkened corridors into a large room filled with mismatched furniture, the remnants of donations and forgotten homes. Near the window, beneath the pale glow of the parking lot lights, Crane sat alone at a round table. He looked smaller somehow, sharper. When Reyes stepped inside, Crane lifted his head. His eyes caught the light and held it. They were waiting. Detective, Crane said, voice steady, almost pleased. I was hoping you'd come back tonight. Morrison hesitated at the doorway, suddenly unsure whether she was witnessing a breakthrough or a confession. Doorway. Should I stay? Morrison asked. That won't be necessary, Crane said before Reyes could answer. His voice was calm, assured. The detective and I have matters to settle. There was something in the certainty of his tone that made Morrison step back. I'll be at the front desk, she told Reyes, though hesitation lingered in her eyes. When the door closed, the room felt smaller. Reyes sat across from Crane and immediately sensed the change. The slouch was gone. The trembling hands were steady, resting flat against the table. His posture was upright, his gaze fixed and unwavering, present in a way that defied everything Reyes had been told about his condition. You said you needed to tell me something, Reyes said carefully. I wasn't honest with you earlier, Crane replied, wasting no time. Not entirely, but enough to matter. About what? About being a witness. Crane leaned forward slightly. A strange scent reached Reyes, antiseptic mixed with something faintly sweet, like wilted flowers sitting too long in water. I told you I saw a man leaving the scene, Crane continued. That was true, in a way. In what way? I saw him in the glass, Crane said softly. In a shop window, his face caught in the reflection as I walked away. The words settled between them, heavy and unmistakable. Ray's kept his face neutral, though his pulse spiked. Are you saying you were there when Carmen Valdez was killed? Crane didn't hesitate. I'm saying I was there when she died. There was no emotion in his voice, no pride, no remorse, no thrill. It was the tone of a man stating a fact long memorized. She made a very small sound at the end, he added, like someone exhaling after holding their breath too long. Ray's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, then stopped. The man before him was physically fragile, but his eyes were razor sharp, measuring every reaction. Mr. Crane, Ray said slowly, I need to advise you of your rights. Miranda, Crane chuckled, the sound dry and papery. Detective, I'm 87 years old with a brain that's eating itself. I could confess to the most infamous crime in history and no one would take it to trial. I'll be gone within a couple of years, maybe sooner. Prison doesn't frighten someone already locked inside his own mind. Then why tell me? Ray's asked. Crane looked toward the window, where the parking lot lights cast long, sterile reflections on the glass. Because the garden is failing, he said quietly. All those memories I nurtured so carefully, they're rotting. The walls I built to keep them contained are collapsing. I plan to take it all with me, but this disease has its own plans. He turned back to Ray's. The memories want out. What memories? Ray's asked. All of them, Crane replied. Carmen and her red shoes, Linda, who used to hum while she walked, Janet, who carried pepper spray and believed it would save her. His lips pressed together briefly. Patricia fought the hardest, scratched my arms badly enough that it took weeks to heal. Crane paused, his eyes distant but clear. And there are others, he said softly. Denise, Crane went on calmly. The first, she looked so surprised when she finally understood what was happening. Ray's hand moved toward his phone. Not yet, Crane said, lifting a thin but steady hand. Let me finish. You came here for answers. It would be rude to interrupt now. Every instinct screamed at Ray's to end this, to call it in, to put distance between himself and the man across the table. Instead, he leaned back, forcing himself to listen. Why? Ray's asked. Why did you kill them? Crane frowned, genuinely perplexed. That's like asking why lungs draw air or why a heart insists on beating. It wasn't a decision. It was a necessity, as natural to me as any other function of the body. But it began somewhere, Ray's pressed. Something started it. Yes, Crane said slowly, understanding. He stared at the tabletop, as if it were a doorway. I was 29, working late nights at Roosevelt Elementary, empty halls, quiet rooms. That's when it became clear to me other people weren't built the way I was. They felt fear where I felt curiosity. They clung to life in a way that felt outdated, almost childish. His fingers tapped softly against the wood. Have you ever been truly hungry, detective? Not skipping dinner. I mean the kind of hunger that rewrites who you are. The kind that teaches you you're alone in your species. So you started killing, Ray said. Crane shook his head. No, I started hunting. There's a distinction. Animals kill to survive, to protect. I hunted for something rarer. For what? For moments of perfect clarity, Crane said. Moments when the pretending stopped. When I didn't have to wear their rules or their masks. When I could be exactly what I was. His eyes unfocused briefly. There was a teacher, he continued. Mrs. Patterson. She enjoyed pointing out children who didn't fit, standing them in front of the class, explaining piece by piece what was wrong with them while everyone watched. The memory drifted, thinning. But that's just an old story, Crane said lightly. The hunger existed long before her. She only helped me understand that suffering could teach valuable lessons. Ray swallowed hard. How many? He asked. The 5 you know about, Crane replied. Then he smiled. But those were only the ones you found, the ones I allowed you to find. The air in the room felt suddenly heavier. There were others, Ray asked. Oh, many, Crane said gently. The garden was far larger than you ever imagined. Carmen and the rest were only what grew above the soil. The real garden, the secret one, ran much deeper. His gaze drifted past the walls. Hitchhikers no one filed reports for, runaways whose families had already given up, women whose absence could be explained away with a shrug. He looked back at Ray's, the invisible ones, the forgotten ones. Ray's forced himself to speak. How many? Crane didn't answer immediately. I stopped counting after 30, he said at last. Crane spoke without pride, without excitement, only with the detached accuracy of someone listing measurements. I kept reminders, he said. Small things, easy to carry, a ring, a photo, a strand of hair. His eyes never left Ray's. I buried them carefully, always the same way, in Balboa Park near the Rose Garden, each one placed according to a pattern only I knew. Ray's felt his mouth go dry. I memorized every location, Crane continued. Landmarks don't forget even when people do. I could walk you to every spot with my eyes closed. Even now, he tapped his temple lightly. With this disease hollowing me out, I can still recite the coordinates perfectly. Why are you telling me this? Ray asked, his voice barely steady. Because this illness is stripping away everything else, Crane said quietly. It's taking my name, my sense of time, my reflection. His gaze darkened. But it's leaving the memories. I won't know who I am, but I'll remember the sound Patricia made when her breath failed. I'll remember the exact blue Linda's lips turned. Those memories will be all that's left of me. He paused. And they deserve a better keeper than a collapsing mind. Crane reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded a creased sheet of paper. His handwriting wavered, but every word was clear. Rows of locations filled the page, bearings, distances, dates, recorded with the discipline of a man who trusted geometry more than memory. 47, he said. 47 women, 47 places. His voice softened, almost reverent. 47 families who deserve answers. Ray took the paper with shaking hands. The entries were unnervingly precise, measured steps from fixed landmarks, trees, benches, stones that would outlive them both. A system built by someone who understood that people disappear, but places remain. Why did you stop? Ray asked. Crane exhaled slowly. Time caught up to me, joints stiffened, strength faded. A thin smile appeared, and the hunger began to dull. By the end of the 90s, months passed without the urge returning. I thought it was wisdom. He shook his head, probably just biology. He looked back at Ray's. Even monsters age, detective. Ray straightened. Mr. Crane, I'm placing you under arrest. For what? Crane asked mildly. The fantasies of a confused old man. For a moment his sharpness flickered. His shoulders sagged. The weight of age returned. By morning, Crane murmured, this conversation will be gone like it never happened. His eyes lifted one last time. But you'll remember, and that will be enough. The door creaked open. Ruddy, Morrison said gently. It's late, you should be resting. Crane blinked, confusion washing over his face like a tide. Bed, he asked, already. Ray stood there, the paper heavy in his hand, knowing the truth had just been entrusted to him, and that it was now his burden to carry. The change was sudden and total. Crane's alert, calculating gaze vanished, replaced by the soft fog of confusion Ray's had seen earlier. "Where am I?" the old man asked, voice small, uncertain. "You're in the common area, Ruddy," Morrison said gently. "You wanted to speak with the nice policeman, remember?" Her tone carried the patience of someone used to guiding a mind lost in its own labyrinth. "A policeman?" Crane looked at Ray's blankly. "Am I in trouble?" Ray straightened, the folded list of coordinates burning in his pocket. "No, Mr. Crane, you're not in trouble." As Morrison steered him toward the doorway, Crane shuffled with the hesitant gait of someone navigating unfamiliar terrain. Then, just before the threshold, his head snapped back, eyes clear, voice steady. "Don't forget to water the garden, detective. Some things shouldn't be allowed to die." Ray's didn't move as they disappeared down the hall. He sat in his car for hours, the paper beside him glowing in the dim light like a radioactive artifact. Part of him wanted to dismiss the night as a hallucination of a failing mind, but the coordinates were exact. The details matched known facts. The pattern, the timeline, too consistent to ignore. At 6:00 a.m., he called Santos, waking her. "This better be important," she groaned. "I need you at Balboa Park," he said. "Metal detector evidence kit. Bring everything." "Why?" Ray's recounted Crane's confession. The hidden garden, the list of coordinates, and the haunting clarity of the old man's final words. Outside, the sunrise gilded the Pacific in shades of pink and gold, so vivid they felt obscene against the darkness of what he had learned. A long silence followed. "Gabriel," Santos said finally, voice low, "you realize what you're asking me to believe." "I know how it sounds," he admitted, "but the coordinates, they match missing person reports. I spent 3 hours cross-referencing them with cold case files. 3 hours, 14 matches, 14 women, mostly runaways, a few listed as voluntary disappearances. Ages, timelines, they all fit the pattern Crane described." Santos exhaled slowly. "Even if that's true, even if we find something, the chain of evidence is broken. A confession from someone with dementia isn't admissible. It won't hold up." "I'm not building a case," Ray said firmly. "I'm trying to give families answers, that's all. Assuming, of course, that he's telling the truth and not weaving fantasies out of a failing mind." "Based on old news reports," Ray said quietly. "Then we prove it one way or another. One morning, one location. If we don't find anything, we walk away." 2 hours later, they stood in Balboa Park's rose garden, the borrowed metal detector humming in Ray's hands. The air was thick with the tension of either vindication or professional humiliation. He had chosen the first location, the earliest date on Crane's list. From the bronze sundial, 31 paces southwest to the climbing rose arbor. Then 18 paces nor-northwest to the irrigation valve cover, marked DM, dated March 15th, 1973. The first sweep yielded nothing but trash, bottle caps, foil, debris long forgotten. But the second pass produced a steady, urgent beat near a bed of climbing roses, planted decades after Crane's notation. Both detectives froze. "How deep?" Santos asked, though her voice betrayed reluctance. Ray's knelt, spade in hand, digging with care, every motion measured, almost reverent. 18 inches down, his blade struck something dense, unnatural. He pried it free. The object, once plastic, had transformed over decades into something leathery, paper-like. Inside, preserved by San Diego's dry climate, lay a delicate gold bracelet. The name Denise was etched in flowing script. Santos froze, gloved hand hovering over it. "Holy Denise Martinez," she whispered. "Age 24. Reported missing March 12, 1973. Last seen leaving her job at the downtown department store." Ray's mind raced. He had memorized these details during his sleepless night of cross-referencing cold cases. Her family had filed reports for years before giving up hope. "We need to call this in," Santos said, urgency creeping into her voice. "Not yet," Ray's replied. "We check one more location first." The second site led them to a grove of eucalyptus trees on the park's eastern edge. From the Civil War Memorial Cannon, 67 paces due east to the twin palm trees, then 15 paces south to a storm-drained grate. The detector's alarm sounded again. Ray's dug carefully, pulling out a small, weathered jewelry box. Inside lay a high school class ring and a faded photograph of a young woman, dark hair framing a shy smile. The inscription read, "Linda Vasquez, class of 1971. Santos sank onto a nearby bench, stunned. "Linda Vasquez, 21, Ray's murmured. "Disappeared June 1973, walking home from her job at the grocery store. Her family assumed she ran off to Los Angeles with a boyfriend." The reality of Crane's confessions, the hidden garden, the buried evidence, was no longer theory. It was tangible and terrifyingly real. The jewelry box balanced on Santos's knees. She looked at Ray's, wide-eyed. "Gabriel, what did we just uncover?" "The biggest serial killer case in San Diego's history," he said quietly. "And our only witness is an 87-year-old man who may not remember telling us any of it by lunchtime." The rest of the morning was a blur of verification and painstaking documentation. Denise Martinez's bracelet matched photographs provided by her surviving sister. Linda Vasquez's class ring was confirmed with fingerprint analysis, matched against prints she'd submitted for a job months before her disappearance. By noon, Ray's had enough to request a full excavation of Crane's listed locations. By evening, the foundations of Southern California's violent crime history were being rewritten before his eyes. The 6 months that followed became an all-consuming investigation. Federal agents, forensic anthropologists, and grief counselors joined the effort. 43 of the 47 sites yielded either human remains or personal effects. 4 families received closure they had long since given up hoping for. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit began reconstructing a chilling profile of a predator whose crimes had spanned nearly 30 years. Yet Rutherford Crane, the man who had meticulously curated his garden of death, was deemed unfit to stand trial. Dementia had claimed him completely. He no longer recognized his own name, let alone the details of decades-old murders. 6 months after their midnight conversation, Ray's returned to Golden Sunset. Crane sat in the sunroom, staring blankly at the Pacific, pale eyes empty and calm. The sharp intelligence that had once calculated angles of approach and cataloged the dying breaths of his victims had vanished, replaced by a serene, almost innocent vacancy. "Mr. Crane," Ray said softly, sitting beside him, "do you remember me?" The old man turned, politely confused. "Have we met before? I'm sorry, I don't remember much these days." "We talked about gardening once," Ray said, voice low. "About memory, about what grows in dark places." "Gardening?" Crane's face lit up with the innocence of a child. I, I used to have a garden, beautiful roses, I think. Or maybe it was someone else's garden. It's hard to tell the difference anymore. Reyes gazed at the endless ocean, thinking of the 43 families who now knew the truth about their missing daughters, sisters, mothers. Relief mingled with anguish, the understanding that evil had lived among them for decades, hidden in plain sight, only to be uncovered by the most unlikely witness. And patient, utterly without remorse. "The garden is gone now," Reyes said softly, though Crane no longer registered the words. "Everything in it has been brought into the light." That evening, Reyes filed his final report on the South Crest Strangler case. Officially, it credited diligent police work and advances in forensic technology for resolving a mystery frozen in time. There was no mention of midnight confessions, of the moral tightrope walked to extract truth from a dying mind, of the careful harvest of memory and evidence. But late at night, when sleep refused him, Reyes thought of gardens and the things we plant, the things we harvest. He thought of Rutherford Crane, who attended his secret collection for 26 years before dementia finally set the victims free from their underground prison. Sometimes in the fragile hours between midnight and dawn, Reyes wondered, had Crane's final act been cruelty or mercy, the last deliberate choice of a dying monster, or the first honest moment in a life built on deception? The disease that stole Crane's identity also stole any satisfaction he might have drawn from his crimes. In the end, perhaps that was a form of justice, a predator reduced to someone who could no longer remember why he once believed other people existed only for his amusement. The garden was empty now, its secrets unearthed, cataloged, and transformed into evidence. Yet Reyes knew there were other gardens, other careful cultivators, patient and meticulous, convinced they were different from everyone else. The hunt never truly ended. It only paused, waiting for the next set of coordinates, the next midnight confession, the next moment a monster chose remembrance over oblivion. In his dreams, Reyes sometimes saw Crane as he had appeared in that final lucid moment, sharp, calculating, without illusion about what he was. The old man's words echoed across the decades. "Don't forget to water the garden, detective. Some things shouldn't be allowed to die." But some things, Reyes knew, should never have been allowed to grow at all. Epilogue. The call came on a Tuesday morning in November, 8 months after Crane's death from complications of dementia. Reyes was reviewing case files when his phone rang. The caller ID read, Golden Sunset Care Facility. "Detective Reyes, this is Dr. Patricia Williams, Golden Sunset's medical director. I'm calling about Mr. Crane's personal effects." Reyes set down his coffee, heart tightening. He had assumed Crane's nephew had already handled this. Represented something else entirely. Control, mastery, the final act of a mind obsessed with cataloging life and death in equal measure. Reyes sat in the idling car, the salt air heavy in his lungs, the engine ticking softly as it cooled. 47 faces stared back at him in memory, each one a frozen testament to a crime almost unimaginable. He felt the weight of the responsibility pressing down like a tidal wave. These weren't just pieces of evidence. They were intimate windows into the terror and humanity of the victims. Each photograph demanded recognition, demanded remembrance. Reyes realized that Crane's meticulous documentation, horrific as it was, had inadvertently given the families a fragment of truth that had eluded them for decades. For a long while, he simply stared out at the Pacific, the rhythmic crashing of the waves contrasting with the storm of thoughts inside his mind. The box, simple and unassuming, contained a universe of grief and precision. Reyes ran a hand over the wood, thinking about the care with which Crane had preserved each image, each moment, as though the act of recording could somehow honor the lives he had taken. And yet it was a terrible honor twisted by years of obsession. Reyes knew what he held could destroy lives, yet also give closure. 47 families had waited for answers, and now, in a small, terrible way, they had them. But with that knowledge came an unbearable weight. The intimate awareness of the violence, the fear, the humanity cut short. Reyes exhaled slowly, closing the box, letting the tissue paper fall into place. He couldn't release it yet. Not to the world, not to the families. Not until he understood how to wield this final truth responsibly. Outside, the Pacific glittered beneath the morning sun, endless and indifferent. Inside the car, 47 moments of frozen time sat quietly, demanding witness, and reminding him that even in the coldest acts of cruelty, the traces of life endure. The moment Reyes opened the small wooden box, a chill ran down his spine, sharp and electric. 47 faces stared back at him, frozen in terror, confusion, and disbelief, captured not in life, but in the instant it vanished. These weren't ordinary photographs. They were a cruel mirror held up to mortality, a testament to the precise, unflinching gaze of a mind that had measured and cataloged death with obsessive care. And yet, there was something darker beneath the surface. Reyes' eyes flicked across the images, taking in the subtle details. A corner of wallpaper here, a particular light fixture there, the faint trace of a child's drawing taped to the wall. These weren't random crime scenes. Some of the victims had been lured to a single private place, a location hidden in plain sight where Crane had worked without fear, arranging bodies with the cold precision of a scientist and photographing them in their final moments. The same room, over and over, a stage for horror perfected through years of practice. Reyes felt the weight of it all pressing in. The man was gone, dead, his dementia having stolen him from the world. And yet through these images, Crane reached across the void, presenting a puzzle, a final moral riddle. What does one do with the evidence of absolute cruelty? Does showing it honor the victims, or does it inflict a new kind of pain on the living? Could families handle the truth, or was ignorance the only mercy? The detective's hand hovered over his phone before he dialed. "Maria, meet me at the station. Now." "Gabriel, what are you talking about? Crane, been dead 8 months. The families have closure. This is done." "This isn't over. There's a location we haven't found, and victims we haven't accounted for." By nightfall, the secure briefing room was a gallery of horror. The photographs lay spread across the table, sterile under fluorescent lighting, yet brimming with life in its most grotesque form. The precise instant when fear crystallized, when hope dissolved, when humanity confronted mortality head-on. Every detail demanded attention. The texture of a wall, the shadow of a fixture, the subtle placement of an object that marked the difference between a public act and a private ritual. Reyes and Santos worked in silence, the air thick with the unspoken weight of the discovery. Each photograph told more than the story of a single death. Together, they whispered of a methodical mind, a mind that had turned killing into an art of observation, measurement, and memory. The pieces were falling into place, yet the enormity of it clawed at them both. The unseen garden of pain Crane had cultivated, the precision, the patience, and the terrible consistency that suggested more than anyone had imagined. Outside the room, the city moved on. Traffic hummed, radios chattered, lives continued unaware. Inside, Reyes felt the echo of Crane's presence in every image, as if the killer's obsession had survived him, whispering instructions, challenging them to see clearly, to follow the path he had left behind. "This is bigger than we thought," Reyes murmured, his voice low, almost swallowed by the weight of the photos. "Much bigger, and there's still a place out there, a place we haven't found." Santos swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. "You mean there's a kill room, a single location where he brought them?" He nodded, and judging by these backgrounds, it wasn't just once. It happened over years. He practiced, perfected, documented. We need to find it before we can ever understand the scale of what he did. The room was silent but for the soft rustle of paper and the occasional inhale. 47 faces, 47 moments frozen forever, and the knowledge that the story was not yet finished. Somewhere, in some hidden place, the last piece of Crane's meticulous, horrifying puzzle waited to be uncovered, and the discovery would rewrite everything they thought they knew about the South Crest Strangler. And Reyes knew in the pit of his stomach that the hunt was far from over. The garden had not yet been fully revealed. The last secrets were still buried, waiting for the brave or the desperate to unearth them. Consciousness itself seemed to shiver under the weight of the images. Each photograph was more than a record of death. It was a carefully curated moment of absolute finality. Santos studied them with an intensity that made Reyes pause. "Gabriel, look at this," she said, arranging a small cluster of 7 photos. Her finger traced the wallpaper, faint but consistent, a pattern of tiny flowers on cream, repeated across each frame. Then she shifted to another set, pointing out the same globe-style ceiling fixture and the identical angle of light. Reyes leaned closer, catching the subtle thread she'd spotted. In that corner of the drawing, a child's house, stick figures. He wasn't killing randomly. He had a private place, a room where he could control everything, take his time. They worked methodically, parsing every detail. The wallpaper screamed 1970s suburban, the globe light fixture likely installed in a home from the 1950s or 60s, and the drawing suggested a domestic setting, ordinary and intimate. But where? Crane's known addresses were all apartments, rentals scattered across the city. Nothing matched the pattern of a family home, the perfect private space implied in the photographs. For 3 grueling hours, they cross-referenced Crane's employment records against vacant or abandoned properties. Every lead dissolved. Homes sold, buildings renovated, sites built over. Time had swallowed them whole. Santos combed through condemned property lists from the 70s while Reyes focused on school district buildings, the places Crane had access to as a maintenance supervisor. "What about this?" she said, pointing to a file. "Warehouse District, City Heights. 3 buildings scheduled for demolition in '74, delayed 2 years. Reyes shook his head. Crane's route didn't reach that far south. Check church basements, community centers. Nothing matches his access or the time frame. Santos paused, thinking wider. Then what about the schools themselves? Any closed temporarily? Reyes raised an eyebrow. Closed. That asbestos removal project, she said. Roosevelt Elementary, closed in 1974. Something clicked in Reyes's chest, a faint, icy thrill of anticipation. Here it was, a space shuttered from the public, a building empty enough for a predator to operate unseen. The kill room wasn't in a warehouse, wasn't in a stranger's home. It had been hiding in plain sight, cloaked by bureaucratic necessity, waiting for anyone to connect the dots. The two of them stared at the files, the magnitude of the realization settling like dust in the air. This was the place where Crane had perfected his dark artistry. Every photograph, every small detail, every life preserved in that frozen instant, it had been taken here. And now, after decades, the final piece of the puzzle had surfaced. Shift in the shadows of a nearly empty school had set a chain of events in motion that no courtroom could ever contain. Crane's mind, once a precise instrument of cruelty, had crumbled with age, yet left behind a trail of evidence so exacting it could still speak decades later. Reyes felt the weight of it pressing against his chest. The responsibility to honor the victims, the responsibility to contain the horror, the responsibility to remember without exposing. Outside, the city was waking, oblivious to the darkness that had once crept quietly through its streets. Reyes and Santos walked to their cars, each step heavy with the knowledge of the lives cataloged, the tragedies meticulously preserved in photographs that would never see light. For 47 women, their stories could finally rest, safely archived, shielded from prying eyes, held in the hands of those who understood the difference between justice and voyeurism. Reyes stared at the horizon, the morning sun scattering gold across the Pacific, and thought about memory, how it could be twisted, harvested, or lost entirely. Crane's garden had been lethal, but it had also been finite. It had ended. The predator was gone, the secrets buried, and yet the lesson remained. Evil doesn't vanish quietly. It only waits for the inattentive to stumble upon it. Somewhere in the quiet of the city, lives went on. Families healed in small, fragile ways. Investigators learned more about human darkness, about the precision and patience it took to maintain it, and about the moral burden of what it meant to witness the aftermath without exploiting it. And somewhere long after dawn had claimed the streets, Detective Reyes understood the unspoken truth of his long vigil. Some gardens are meant to be tended, some horrors cataloged, and some secrets never shared. The past, preserved in shadow, would remain safe, not for the sake of the monster, but for those who deserved peace more than anyone could imagine. Detective Reyes sat in his car, the hum of morning traffic a muted backdrop to the storm of thoughts in his head. The confession in the nursing home had felt like closure, a long-awaited key turning in the lock of decades-old mysteries. But now he understood something darker, something carefully hidden behind Crane's calm words and precise coordinates. It hadn't been an act of remorse. It had been a final, masterful performance. Rutherford Crane had choreographed his own legacy with the cunning of a man who knew every step the system would take. Every detail, the timing, the selection of a lucid moment before dementia claimed him entirely. The careful delivery of evidence was calculated. He had transformed confession into strategy, turning his final days into a showcase of control. The photographs, the lists, the exactness of each burial site, they weren't gifts. They were Crane's signature, proof that he had documented his crimes with the meticulousness of a craftsman, leaving behind a chillingly complete record of his work. Reyes felt a chill at the brilliance of it. Even in death, Crane had shaped how he would be remembered, not as a feeble old man fading into obscurity, but as one of California's most methodical and prolific killers, a man whose intellect, patience, and obsession could not be denied. Recognition, preservation, and the eerie satisfaction of knowing his victims' stories had been cataloged on his terms. That was his ultimate triumph. The monster had slipped away quietly, death stealing him peacefully in the night, leaving behind a mind that had already escaped the law's reach. And yet, in the wake of his passing, the consequences of Crane's precision persisted. 43 families had closure, their grief finally tempered by certainty. But no one would ever know the full extent of Crane's orchestration, the calculated nature of the piece he had delivered, the fact that their relief had been bought with one final manipulation by the man who had shattered their lives decades earlier. Reyes gripped the steering wheel, the weight of it pressing down like lead. Some truths were too poisonous for the heart. Some knowledge would have shattered the fragile reconstruction of grief and healing, and perhaps he thought it was better that the world never saw the full measure of Crane's genius or cruelty. The photographs remained sealed, the evidence cataloged, the histories preserved for those few who needed to study it. But beyond that, it would never surface. The case was officially closed, the victims identified, the families given answers, however partial, to lay their loved ones to rest. Justice, fragile and imperfect, had been served, and somewhere in San Diego, life moved forward quietly, leaving behind only the shadow of a garden carefully tended by a man who had spent decades mastering control over life, death, and memory itself. The night was quiet, the kind of stillness that presses against your chest and refuses to let go. Detective Reyes lay awake, staring at the ceiling while the world outside blurred into shadows and the first hints of dawn. In those fragile hours, Crane's words echoed louder than ever, about gardens, about things that shouldn't be allowed to die. At the time, they had felt cryptic, almost poetic. Now Reyes understood their weight. Some things did deserve to be preserved, not as trophies, not as evidence of cruelty, but as lessons, warnings, and reminders for anyone who might follow in Crane's shadow. The real memorial wasn't in the faded photographs or the meticulously logged coordinates. It wasn't in the dirt he had dug or the roses he had never planted in a real garden. The true monument was in the work that followed. The investigators who used the patterns, the precision, the methodical cruelty of Crane's mind to hunt down the next predator before history repeated itself. It was in the families who finally, after decades of wondering and waiting, could close their eyes without imagining the worst. And it was in the quiet truth that even the most careful, calculating monsters cannot escape time, memory, or mortality. For 26 years, Crane had cultivated his private world of terror with patience that rivaled nature itself. But in the end, it wasn't his hand that decided what survived. Justice, messy and human, came from the living, the detectives, the families, the stories that refused to be buried. The photographs were locked away. The lists of coordinates were cataloged in a sterile vault. Crane himself, once sharp and terrifyingly precise, had been reduced to a shadow of himself, remembered only as a case study, a cautionary tale. And yet somewhere beyond the vault, beyond the files and evidence, life persisted. Morning sunlight spilled over San Diego, illuminating streets, homes, and parks that had long been haunted by absence and fear. 43 families, 43 separate worlds, could finally breathe, could finally begin to stitch together lives that had been torn apart. The garden Crane had tended so meticulously was gone, its secrets scattered, its curator erased. But what remained was far more enduring. The knowledge that memory, courage, and the determination to seek truth could outlast even the darkest human obsession. In the quiet between night and day, Reyes allowed himself a moment of understanding. Justice doesn't always come neat, wrapped in verdicts and sentences. Sometimes it comes messy, human, imperfect, but real. It comes in the families who heal, in the predators who are diminished to nothing more than records in a vault, and in the stories we tell so that even the most hidden horrors are never forgotten. The garden may have been empty, but the light had returned, and with it, the chance for life, remembrance, and hope. Story 2, Echoes of the Silent Garden. The house on Elm Ridge Road had always carried an unnatural stillness, but after the accident, that quiet had become suffocating. It pressed against Lara Kowalski's chest, wrapped around her ribs like a shroud, filling every corner with the absence of life. 3 weeks had slipped by since the funeral, each day dragging her through the rooms like she was walking across frozen glass. afraid a single wrong step would shatter everything. She paused at the kitchen doorway, her fingers brushing against the faded height marks on the frame, Liam's childhood measurements. Despite layers of paint over the years, his growth chart clung stubbornly to the wood. Some things shouldn't be painted over, his mother had said when they'd bought the house from his grandmother. Now those words felt like a weight in her chest, heavy and unforgiving. The kitchen was untouched, frozen in the morning of that terrible October day. His coffee mug still rested in the drainer, his reading glasses still balanced on the nightstand, the dental appointment card still magneted to the fridge. She couldn't move them, couldn't face putting away the small relics that made the absence of him feel even more absolute. Taking a shaky breath, she reached for the tea canister. And then the door behind her swung shut. Softly, almost politely, but with a finality that made her heart seize. It clicked into the latch. She whirled around, eyes wide, pulse racing. That door had never closed on its own. Liam had always complained it hung crookedly, that it needed a firm push. Her gaze flicked to the microwave, half expecting distraction to soothe her nerves. The green numbers blinked, 8:43. Then, in an instant, they snapped back to 3:27, the correct time. Lara blinked. The numbers held steady now, ordinary, mundane. But the room felt smaller, closer, as if the shadows were leaning in to watch. Something lurked just outside perception, listening. The kettle shrieked and the sound jolted her. Spice jars toppled, clattering across the counter. One rolled off the edge, shattering on the tile. Oregano, Liam's own, grown and dried with care, filled the air with its pungent, earthy scent. Lara knelt to gather the larger shards, careful not to slice herself, and a memory hit her like a punch. She saw him there again in that same kitchen, a warm July evening. His hands green from harvesting herbs, explaining with fervor the delicate art of air-drying oregano. His voice was alive, carrying the same intensity he gave to discussions of poetry, history, everything he loved. She had barely listened, captivated instead by the way sunlight kissed his dark hair, highlighting the tiny scar above his left eyebrow, a memento of a childhood crash, a bicycle, a stray branch. "You have to cut it before it flowers," he had said, eyes intent on the herb, not her. "Timing is everything. Miss it, and you might as well throw it away." Now, as she swept oregano and glass into a dustpan, the cruel irony of those words twisted in her chest. Timing. It had been everything. And their timing had run out on that Tuesday morning in October, when a delivery truck driver had made a wrong turn, a decision that had shattered a life and left silence to fill the spaces where love had once lived. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her body refused to move. She had disposed of the broken glass and made her tea with the precision of someone on autopilot, choosing chamomile because its gentle scent promised a fleeting sense of calm. Her fingers brushed the cabinet handle and froze. It felt like cold, twisted metal, a flash of pain and alarm that made her jerk her hand back. But there was nothing there, just the familiar smooth white of the painted door. The kitchen door stayed shut, an unspoken barrier that seemed to hold its own secrets. Lara hesitated to open it, sensing that whatever was waiting beyond might not be part of the world she knew. Instead, she sank into a chair at the small table where she and Liam had shared countless meals, cradling her warm mug as the steam curled into her face. The chamomile brought faint comfort, warmth, memory, the illusion of safety, but it could not erase the lingering scent of oregano, of hands that had once tended the herbs with loving care. The October light waned, spilling amber and rust across the worn countertops. This had always been her favorite hour, the quiet stretch between day and night when the world seemed to pause. But now, the fading glow felt threatening, as though shadows themselves had begun to breathe. She lifted the mug to her lips, inhaling deeply when she heard it. Soft, measured footsteps in the hall beyond the kitchen. Not a scrape or scuffle, not the careless shuffle of a pet, but deliberate, patient, purposeful. Her hands froze around the mug. Each step stopped, then resumed, echoing like a heartbeat in the empty house. Rationality tried to claw its way in. The settling of an old house, a mouse in the walls, a stray cat from the neighbor's yard. None of it matched the deliberate cadence she had just heard. These were human steps, aware, exact, and impossibly close. And then the doorknob began to turn, slowly, clockwise, catching the last shards of sunlight like a signal. Lara held her breath. Every fiber of her being screamed danger, yet her eyes remained fixed on the brass knob, mesmerized, terrified, unable to look away. The handle shifted a fraction more, the metallic click like a whispered invitation, and the world seemed to shrink around her. Something was there, something moving through the house in the space Liam once filled, carrying with it the weight of absence, the echo of memory, and the sense that this night, this quiet, had grown a presence all its own. The door opened with the same careful restraint with which it had closed, revealing the hallway beyond. Empty, and yet not entirely so. The shadows pooled unnaturally along the walls, darker than they had any right to be, as though something had just slipped away around the corner, retreating at the precise moment it knew it had been seen. The air drifting into the kitchen carried a scent she couldn't name, layered and unsettling. Rain striking hot asphalt. Copper pennies held too long in the palm. The stale breath of clothes forgotten in a sealed closet. Ara rose slowly, her legs trembling beneath her weight. The sensible thing, the correct thing, would be to step into the hallway to confirm that nothing was there, to expose the fear as imagination, grief, fatigue. But every instinct she possessed rebelled. Her body refused to cross the familiar boundary of the kitchen, as though doing so would mean surrendering something she could never reclaim. "Hello," she called, her voice thin, fragile against the encroaching dusk. Is someone there?" The words lingered unanswered, hollow, almost embarrassing. Of course there was no one there. She had been alone for 3 weeks, alone when the house fell silent at night, alone when morning came, alone now, and alone, she told herself, for the foreseeable future. Grief had a way of bending perception, of giving weight to coincidence and intention to sound. Old houses creaked, pipes shifted, memory filled gaps where certainty failed. She repeated this logic carefully, like a prayer. Yet even as she did, a deeper certainty settled into her bones. Something had changed. The silence itself felt altered, no longer empty but aware, charged, attentive. Her skin prickled beneath the sensation of being noticed. She was still alone, but she was no longer unobserved. Ara remained in the kitchen until darkness fully claimed the house. When she finally forced herself upstairs, she moved quickly, quietly, pausing at every doorway, listening for a sound that never came. The house offered nothing, no footsteps, no whispers, no proof. Only that unshakable feeling remained. That night she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. Rational explanation still existed. Grief could fracture the senses. Stress could manufacture meaning where none lived. The mind, desperate for order, could weave stories from silence. All of it made sense. And yet beneath those comforting thoughts, something colder lingered. Not fear. Recognition. As though whatever had stepped into her solitude that evening had not come by accident, and now that it had found her, it was content to wait. She knew trauma could fracture the mind in subtle ways. Loss did not always announce itself with screams or collapse. Sometimes it whispered, borrowing familiar shapes and sounds. She understood this. She accepted it. Yet understanding brought no relief. If anything, the distance she tried to place between herself and the experience only sharpened it, like acknowledging the dark without daring to look directly at it. At times, it felt as though her rational explanations were an offense, as though whatever shared the bedroom's darkness did not appreciate being reduced to a symptom. Sleep came in shallow fragments. She drifted, then surfaced again and again, each waking marked by the same certainty that something had stirred just beyond her awareness. A shift of weight, a breath not her own. Each time she lay motionless, listening, counting the seconds. The house answered with only its familiar sounds. Old wood settling, pipes sighing, the quiet language of a structure breathing through the night. By morning, she had almost convinced herself it had all been exhaustion, grief-induced anxiety, a mind stretched too thin. Almost, because when she went downstairs to make coffee, every door in the house stood wide open. Bedroom doors, closet doors, the pantry, even the front door, though she was certain she had locked it the night before. Dr. Monica Fernandez had a face that inspired trust without demanding it. Warm brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, silver-streaked hair pulled into a practical bun, hands that moved with gentle certainty, as if they had learned long ago how to guide people through pain without rushing them. She had once been Liam's therapist, during a difficult year when departmental politics had chipped away at his spirit. Lara had scheduled the appointment, now less out of hope than obligation, an act of respect, a way of acknowledging that something needed to be done with the weight pressing harder against her chest each day. Grief manifests differently for everyone, Dr. Fernandez said, her voice steady, practiced, kind. What you're describing, the sensations, the feeling of presence, these experiences are far more common than people realize, especially after sudden traumatic loss. Lara shifted in the leather chair, careful of her ribs. The fractures from the accident were healing, but slowly. The constant ache served as a reminder of twisted metal, of shattered glass, of the moment her life had split cleanly into before and after. It doesn't feel like a hallucination, she said at last, choosing each word with care. It feels like someone is actually there, someone who knows the house, who moves through it the way he did. Dr. Fernandez nodded, making a note in the open file on her desk. That's because your subconscious is drawing from real memory, she replied gently. From patterns your mind knows intimately. Liam lived in that house. He knew its rhythms, its sounds. Your grief is simply giving those memories form. The explanation was sensible, measured, comforting in its logic. And yet, as Lara listened, she felt the same quiet certainty settle in her chest. Memories did not open doors. Memories did not move with purpose. And memories did not leave a house standing open, as though inviting something else inside. For 5 years, her mind had learned him in quiet, invisible ways. It had memorized the cadence of his steps, the pauses in his routines, the way he moved through space without thinking. Thousands of ordinary moments, cataloged without intention. In her current fragility, those memories were no longer staying where they belonged. They were stepping forward, wearing the shape of something real. The explanation made sense. It even offered comfort. But it did not explain why the doors had opened in order. Kitchen, living room, study, bathroom, bedroom. A flawless map of Liam's morning ritual, traced with patient accuracy. nor did it explain why the occurrences were intensifying instead of fading, growing more deliberate as the days passed. "Have you thought about staying somewhere else for a while?" Dr. Fernandez asked gently. "A different environment can sometimes interrupt these patterns. Do you have family you could visit?" Her sister in Phoenix came to mind. Those twice-weekly calls heavy with forced cheer, concern edged with irritation, as though grief were an indulgence Lara was taking too long to outgrow. Her parents, retired in Florida, had offered sunshine and distraction, optimism polished to a shine. The thought of sitting across from them at breakfast, navigating conversations carefully designed to avoid pain, made her chest tight. "I can't leave the house," she said suddenly, startled by the sharpness in her own voice. "Not yet." She swallowed, steadied herself. "It's where we lived, where he still is in a way, his books, his notes, his clothes. I'm not ready to walk away from that." Dr. Fernandez leaned forward, concern softening her features. "No one is asking you to abandon Liam's memory, Lara, but clinging too tightly to physical reminders can sometimes slow the grieving process. Distance doesn't erase love. It gives us space to understand it." "You don't understand," Lara said, heat creeping into her words. "This isn't about clinging, it's about responsibility. I survived. He didn't. I walked away from that intersection. He didn't. That can't be meaningless. There has to be a reason I'm still here, something I'm meant to carry." "Survivor's guilt is very common after trauma," Dr. Fernandez replied softly. "But believing you must suffer to justify your survival, that you owe pain for being alive, that belief will only hurt you. Liam would never want that for you." The words landed hard, like a sudden plunge into cold water. Not because they were wrong, but because part of her feared that whatever still walked the halls of Elm Ridge Road might disagree. Because the words might be right. Beneath the raw ache of grief, buried so deeply that even she barely admitted it to herself, flickered a small, guilty relief. She had survived, he hadn't, and that knowledge, so simple, so undeniable, twisted in her chest with shame. How could living feel like a privilege when it meant he was gone? The thought alone made her stomach churn, an acid of guilt that whispered she deserved the unease, the disturbances that haunted the house. But if the guilt had any truth, what then explained the house itself? What was this presence she felt, moving with familiar rhythms, retracing steps she knew by heart, filling the space with a pattern only Liam had once made his own? "I'd like to try a different approach," Dr. Fernandez said, her pen pausing over notes. "Have you ever heard of EMDR therapy? Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's particularly effective for trauma, helps the brain process memories that get stuck, reduce their emotional charge." Lara nodded faintly, only half listening. Outside the office window, the maples flared in October's fire-red brilliance. She pictured Liam in the yard, raking the leaves himself, every stroke methodical, deliberate. A ritual he claimed helped him think through complex ideas. This year, the leaves would fall in line where they landed, slowly returning to the earth without his careful touch. Dr. Fernandez continued, her voice calm and measured. "Trauma can lodge in the nervous system, unprocessed and unresolved. EMDR helps the mind reframe and integrate those memories. Many people see a reduction in nightmares, intrusive thoughts, and yes, hallucinations." "Hallucinations," Lara repeated in her mind. The word tasted wrong. Her experience felt real, tangible, as if the walls themselves had remembered, as if grief had thinned the veil between the living world and something else. "I'll think about it," she said finally, sliding her purse over her shoulder, the ache of uncertainty still heavy. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice. Dr. Fernandez walked her to the door, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Please don't hesitate to call if you need to talk between sessions. And consider what I said about staying somewhere else for a few nights. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for ourselves is step away, even briefly, just to breathe. Lara nodded, stepping into the crisp October air, her chest tight with the weight of absence and memory, aware that the path forward might begin with just one small, fragile step away from the house, and from the ghost of the life she'd lost. The drive back carried Alara past the intersection where her life had fractured. For weeks, she had skirted this road, weaving through back streets and side avenues, willing herself to avoid the place where time had slammed into her world with unrelenting force. But today, some invisible impulse guided her, a whisper in the back of her mind, and she found herself rolling toward that familiar traffic light. At the corner, a small memorial had been set up. Fading flowers drooped in quiet resignation. A wooden cross bore Liam's name in careful, deliberate strokes, and a laminated photograph caught him mid-laugh, frozen in a moment of joy that now felt achingly distant. Alara pulled her car to the curb, the engine ticking softly as she sat, staring at the humble tribute to a life stolen too soon. The intersection itself was ordinary. Two roads slicing across the suburban grid, nothing remarkable, nothing to betray the horror that had taken place there. No scar marred the asphalt, no monument etched into the pavement. Traffic flowed steadily, indifferent to grief, to memory, to the invisible weight that clung to the corner. Drivers passed, faces fixed on their routines, oblivious to the story etched into this slice of street. She tried to summon the moment, the instant of impact, probing the hazy space in her mind, stretching toward a memory that felt deliberately blank, like a page erased by some protective hand. Her neurologist had warned her this might happen. Some memories are lost forever, locked away by the brain's own sense of mercy. But sitting there, the air filled with the faint scent of late autumn and fading blooms, something shifted inside her. For a flicker of time, she saw it. The delivery truck barreling through the red light, Liam turning toward her with a flash of surprise, not terror, and then the impossible collision of metal and momentum. And alongside that, a fragment she couldn't yet name, something unaccounted for. A subtle detail that refused to settle into logic. It vanished almost immediately, leaving her with nothing but the quiet intersection and the gnawing certainty that she was missing a truth she needed, a memory that could reshape everything that had come after. By the time she turned into her driveway, the afternoon sun had begun its slow descent, slanting low across the yard. Liam's flower beds, once meticulously arranged and tended, were slowly surrendering to the encroaching chill of autumn. Their colors muted, their edges curling with neglect. The garden seemed to whisper the passage of time and loss, a subtle reminder that life, even in its beauty, is fleeting, and memory, even when fragmented, is a weight we carry forever. The house appeared unchanged as Alara pulled into the driveway. White siding, green shutters, the same modest colonial shape that blended seamlessly into the neighborhood. It was the kind of home people passed without a second glance, the kind that promised safety through familiarity. Yet the moment she stepped onto the lawn, that sensation returned, the quiet awareness, as if the house itself were watching her approach, its windows following her progress like unblinking eyes. The feeling no longer startled her. It had settled into her life the way a dull ache does, persistent, intrusive, impossible to ignore, yet somehow survivable. Inside, the air felt interrupted. Not silent exactly, but as though a conversation had ended just before she arrived. Alara moved from room to room out of habit, scanning for signs of disturbance. Chairs sat where she'd left them. Doors remained shut. Nothing obvious had shifted. And yet the stillness carried a weight now, a focus. In the kitchen, something immediately drew her eye. A single oregano leaf rested on the counter beside the stove. Fresh, vibrantly green, its edges uncurled, its surface faintly glossy as though it had been picked moments ago. Her breath caught. She knew with absolute certainty that it didn't belong there. The shattered jar had been cleaned days earlier. There were no living plants indoors. Liam's herb beds outside had withered weeks ago, claimed by frost and neglect. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the leaf. It was warm, supple, real. When she raised it to her face, the sharp, earthy scent bloomed instantly, vivid enough to sting her senses. The smell carried memory with it. Summer evenings, dirt under fingernails, Liam's voice explaining patience and timing as if they were universal laws. This wasn't residue. It wasn't imagination. It felt like something had touched it before she had. Then came the sound. Footsteps. Not the settling creak of an old house. Not the skitter of something small in the walls. These were slow, intentional steps, descending the staircase with care, as if whoever made them were aware of how thin the quiet had become. Alara froze in the kitchen doorway, every muscle locked in place. The steps reached the bottom stair, turned, moved down the hall. Toward her. The sound stopped just outside the kitchen. She realized she was holding her breath, her fingers tightening until the oregano leaf crushed softly between them, releasing one last sharp burst of scent. The silence that followed felt dense, almost tangible, pressing in around her, amplifying the pounding of her heart until she was certain it could be heard through the walls. And then, so faint it barely registered, she heard it. A breath. Her name drifted through the kitchen like a thread pulled tight across distance and time. Laura. The sound buckled her knees. It was his voice, undeniably his, yet altered, stretched thin, as though it had traveled an impossible length to reach her. Not the voice she remembered from lazy mornings or distracted conversations, but something dimmer, frayed at the edges. Please. The word carried urgency, not comfort. It didn't feel like a greeting. It felt like a warning. Every instinct inside her collided at once. Hope surged, sharp and desperate. Terror followed close behind. This was the impossible thing she had secretly wished for since the funeral, the proof that he hadn't vanished completely, that death hadn't erased him as cleanly as everyone insisted it did. But whatever lingered in that voice wasn't reaching for her to soothe her grief. It was reaching because something was wrong. The kitchen door opened on its own, swinging inward to reveal the darkened hall, empty, and yet unmistakably occupied. The air beyond the doorway felt heavier, charged, as if stepping forward meant crossing into a space governed by different rules. The crushed oregano in her hand released its final breath, flooding the room with the smell of warm soil, sunlight, shared meals, and small routines that once felt eternal. She stepped forward, then another step. Love pulled her ahead, fear followed close behind. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Somewhere beyond the house, traffic continued to stream through the intersection that had split her life cleanly in two, indifferent to what waited in the shadows of her hallway. The medium arrived 2 days later, late October, pale light, the kind of afternoon that hinted at winter before the calendar admitted it. Valencia Ristrio didn't look like someone who chased ghosts. Her gray suit was pressed, her movements economical, her leather case more suited to an auditor than a mystic. She studied the house with clinical attention, not reverence. "Sudden deaths can leave impressions behind," she said calmly. "Sometimes they don't understand that they're gone." That evening, the living room became a workspace. Devices were placed with methodical precision: sensors, recorders, temperature monitors. The lights were dimmed. "Stay steady," Valencia instructed. "Grief attracts noise, love attracts clarity." She addressed the empty room without hesitation. "You're not lost, you're being heard." The air changed almost instantly. Cold bloomed outward, sharp enough to sting. Alara's breath fogged. The instruments responded with quiet urgency. "Can you show us you're here?" Valencia asked. The answer came without restraint. Books ripped themselves from the shelves, striking the floor with violent force. Frames rattled. A lamp tipped and shattered. The room filled with chaos, sudden and furious, as if something had been holding itself back and finally broke. Valencia didn't flinch. Her voice sharpened. "This isn't peace," she said. "This is distress." The temperature plunged further. The house groaned, protesting the strain. And beneath it all, woven through the noise, came that voice again, fractured now, layered with something darker. "Don't stay." The words hit Alara harder than any sound. Not a plea for her to come closer, a command for her to step away. Valencia shut everything down at once. Lights snapped on. Silence crashed back into the room. "What is it?" Alara asked, her voice shaking. Valencia met her eyes with grim certainty. "Whatever is here isn't meant to be anchored, and the longer you remain, the more it will try to follow the patterns it remembers." "The doors," Alara whispered, "the routines." "Yes," Valencia said softly, "habit without purpose, motion without rest." That night, Alara slept elsewhere for the first time since the funeral. And for the first time, the house was dark without watching her. In the days that followed, the presence weakened. The sounds faded. The air grew ordinary again. Grief remained, but the attention did not. Some love, she learned, isn't meant to linger in rooms and hallways. Some bonds survive only when they're allowed to let go. And sometimes, the most merciful thing the dead can do is warn the living to keep walking forward, even when it hurts. The room erupted. Not one object, not two, but dozens tore free at once, slamming into the floor with deafening force. Shelves emptied themselves in seconds. The detector screamed like a wounded animal. Numbers on the display raced downward as the air turned razor cold, breath frosting in front of their mouths. Then came the voice. It wasn't coming from a single place. It bled from the walls, the ceiling, the floor itself. Urgent, fractured, desperate. "Get out, get out, get out." Valencia staggered back, the calm she'd carried into the house finally splintering. "This isn't normal," she said sharply. "This is extreme. Whatever is here is panicking." The violence escalated. Frames ripped free and shattered against the far wall. The coffee table lurched across the room as if shoved by unseen hands. The house felt less like shelter and more like a cage under attack. The voice returned, louder now, raw with command. "Leave now." Fear surged through Alara, but beneath it recognition flared. Her chest tightened. "That's him," she whispered. "That's Liam." Valencia didn't argue. She scooped up her equipment and moved for the door. "You need to leave this place," she said urgently. "Immediately. Whatever this is, it's dangerous." But Alara couldn't move. Through the terror, something else pulled at her. Love, sharp and unyielding. Liam, she shouted into the chaos. I'm here. I'm not abandoning you. The house answered with fury. Every window burst outward in the same instant, glass raining into the yard like shattered ice. The walls groaned, the foundations trembled. And then the voice came one last time, not pleading now, but roaring with unmistakable force. Get out before it's too late. Silence followed, absolute, suffocating. Valencia spoke carefully, as if afraid to disturb the stillness. Spirits don't behave like this unless they're trying to stop something, she said. Not to harm, to protect. That night, Alara sat alone, staring at one of Liam's books spread open on the table. Notes filled the margins in his familiar handwriting. He had been studying old beliefs about souls caught between worlds, trapped not by punishment, but by attachment, by love that refused to loosen its grip. She finally understood. What lingered in the house wasn't trying to stay. It was trying to save her from staying with it. Liam wasn't haunting the rooms because he couldn't let go. He was shouting because something else had noticed her grief and was learning her patterns, her habits, her weakness. The house had been quiet before. Now it was hungry. By morning, Alara packed only what she needed. She didn't look back as she closed the door for the last time. Some love survives by lingering. Other love survives by warning you to run. The thought struck her with quiet brutality. What if the words weren't about him at all? What if the chain binding him here wasn't his refusal to leave, but her refusal to release him? The idea hollowed her chest. It explained everything. The rising intensity, the urgency in his voice, the way fear had replaced comfort. If her grief was anchoring him to this house, then every night she clung to his memory was another night he suffered. She closed the book with shaking hands and set it aside, as if sealing the thought inside it. The house felt colder now, not just from the broken windows hastily boarded by a neighbor, but from the realization settling into her bones. This place no longer felt like shelter. It felt like a waiting room no one was meant to stay in. Upstairs, she sat on his side of the bed. The mattress still carried the faint impression of his weight. Letting go suddenly felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, necessary, inevitable, and terrifying beyond words. To release him meant admitting the future would not include him, that mornings would come without his voice, that every ordinary joy ahead would be hers alone. But love, she understood now, wasn't possession. It wasn't clinging until both were destroyed. Love was mercy. Liam, she whispered into the quiet, if you're still here, I don't want you trapped because of me. I don't know how to say goodbye, but I'm trying. Nothing answered, no voice, no movement. Just a change. The air eased, the silence softened. The constant sense of being watched loosened its grip, like hands finally unclenching. That night she slept deeply for the first time since the funeral. No dreams, no footsteps, no voice calling her name. Only rest. Weeks later, on a dull November morning, a real estate agent walked through the house with brisk professionalism, discussing paint, light, and market timing. When she reached the basement, she paused. You'll want this cleaned, she said carefully. In the far corner, where the stone foundation met at an uneven seam, words had been carved deep into the rock, jagged, frantic, unmistakable. Not a message of possession, not a plea to stay, but a warning, etched with desperation by someone who had known what waited in the silence. A final act of love, meant to save her, not haunt her. The warning stared back at her from the stone. Get out before you join me. The carving was rough, hurried, yet unmistakable. She knew his handwriting the way you know a loved one's face in the dark. The sharp capitals, the faint tilt to the left from years of scribbling lecture notes at speed. Small chips of stone still littered the concrete floor, pale and fresh. The agent tried to laugh it away. Basement graffiti, a quick cleanup, paint would erase it. But Lara didn't hear her. No stranger had written those words. No child had snuck into the basement and carved a sentence like that with panic in every groove. Liam had done this, somehow, sometime. After the agent left, the house settled into its familiar hush. Lara went back downstairs and traced the letters with her fingertips. The stone was cold, the edges raw, as if the message had been clawed out rather than carved. It didn't feel like vandalism. It felt like urgency fossilized. She went straight to his study. For weeks she'd avoided it, treating the room like a sealed wound. Now she opened drawers with methodical focus, sifting through papers, notes. Books stacked with scholarly precision. Nothing unusual until the bottom drawer. Beneath graded essays and old conference folders lay a leather-bound journal she had never seen before. Her hands began to shake the moment she opened it. The entries were dated, careful, ordered. They began 3 months before the accident and ended the day before he died. She read standing up, then sitting down, then gripping the edge of his desk as the room tilted around her. Liam wrote about dreams that felt too real, about waking with the certainty that something terrible was approaching, about checking smoke detectors at 3 in the morning, about insisting on gas inspections that found nothing, about the house feeling wrong, not haunted but anticipatory. Then she found the entry that froze her breath. He described carving the warning into the basement wall, not as a joke, not as stress-induced madness, as compulsion, as if the words had risen from somewhere deeper than thought. I don't know what it means, he had written, but it feels necessary, like leaving a rope for someone who hasn't fallen yet. Her vision blurred as tears spilled onto the page. The final entry came next, dated the day before the accident. In it his tone changed. No speculation, no fear, only clarity. He wrote that he finally understood, that the dreams weren't abstract, that the sense of doom had a shape now, a moment, an intersection, a choice made too late by someone else. He wrote that he was afraid, not of dying, but of what might happen after, of being trapped by unfinished love, of becoming something that lingered. If this is real, he ended, then I need her to live, even if it means leaving me behind. Lara closed the journal slowly. The house around her felt different now, not watchful, not heavy. Resolved. By the end of the week, the house was empty. The warning in the basement was left untouched, hidden behind temporary boards. Some things, she understood now, weren't meant to be erased, only respected and left behind. On her last night there, she stood in the doorway and whispered goodbye. Nothing answered, and for the first time, that felt right. That's what he had written. That tomorrow morning the delivery truck would run the red light. That there would be no scream, no time to react, only impact, only silence. Death for both of them, instant and absolute. But that wasn't the part that broke her. What shattered her was the fear beneath it. Liam hadn't been afraid of dying. He had been afraid of her surviving in the wrong way, of her mind refusing the truth, of consciousness inventing a gentler story when reality proved unbearable, of memory reshaping itself into something livable, even if it was false. If both of them died, he believed, She might construct an entire world where she alone walked away from the wreck, breathing, grieving, moving forward, while he vanished into the margins. A lie so complete even death couldn't correct it. The journal slipped from Ara's fingers and struck the floor, its pages splaying open like wings that could no longer lift her. The room seemed to tilt, reality thinning at the edges. It wasn't possible. She was alive. She could feel it, her heart steady, her breath warm in her chest, the dull, persistent ache in her ribs where they'd been broken and were now healing. Pain was proof. Sensation was proof. You couldn't feel pain if you were dead. Could you? She stood too quickly and staggered to the bathroom, gripping the sink as she raised her eyes to the mirror. The face staring back was pale, exhausted, but familiar, hers mostly. She lifted a hand and touched the small scar above her left eyebrow, grounding herself. A childhood accident, a bicycle, a low-hanging branch. Except, her breath caught. That wasn't her scar. That was Liam. She leaned closer, pulse roaring in her ears. The longer she stared, the more wrong it became. The nose wasn't quite right, the eyes too light, the jawline subtly altered as if two faces had been pressed together and fused imperfectly. A composite, a compromise. She raised her hand again. In the mirror for a single terrible heartbeat, the hand that rose wasn't hers. It was larger, stronger. A thin gold wedding band circled the finger, catching the light. Liam's hand. The mirror exploded. Glass burst outward with a sharp, violent sound, fragments raining into the sink and across the tile. Ara screamed and stumbled back, heart hammering, until one remaining shard caught her eye. It was lodged in the frame, angled just enough to reflect her face. No, not her face. The body staring back was pale and unmoving, skin waxy, eyes glassy and unfocused. Blood clotted her hair on the left side of her head. A jagged piece of twisted metal protruded from her chest, stained dark and wet. She knew that body. She had been inside it. She looked exactly like what she was. Dead. The shard slipped free and shattered on the floor, but the truth didn't need reflection anymore. It had already broken through. As she backed away, her palm pressed against her chest, and the steady rhythm beneath it wasn't a heartbeat at all. It was a ticking, slow, mechanical. Stopped at 8:43. The exact time listed on the police report. She wasn't supposed to remember. The bathroom wavered. The tiles rippled like heat rising off asphalt. The walls thinned, their edges blurring, as if the room itself were struggling to stay solid. And somewhere beneath it all, beneath the illusion and the borrowed breath and the carefully constructed lie, something waited. Something that had tried to warn her. Something that had carved its message into stone. Get out before you join me. Too late. She already had. She turned to run, but the doorway betrayed her. Where the hallway should have been, there was twisted metal and shattered glass. The inside of a car, crushed inward like a ribcage, collapsed by a single merciless blow. The air was thick with gasoline and copper. Blood. Sirens wailed somewhere far away, frantic and useless, arriving to a scene already finished. Liam's body slumped against the steering wheel, his head bowed at an unnatural angle, and beside him, there she was. Herself. Eyes closed, neck bent wrong still. The illusion didn't fade gently. It collapsed violently and all at once, like a house of cards struck by a sudden wind. Every comforting detail she had built, every hospital memory, every quiet moment in the house, peeled away to reveal the truth underneath. She had never survived. The delivery truck had killed them both, exactly as Liam had seen. Everything since, the return home, the voices in the dark, the growing violence, had been the final act of a mind refusing to accept its own ending. A consciousness clinging to sensation, to routine, to grief, because letting go felt worse than any haunting. She fell to her knees amid the broken glass, finally understanding the desperation in Liam's voice. He hadn't been trying to chase her from the house. He had been trying to free her from the lie. The house wasn't haunted, it was a cage, built from love, reinforced by fear. His manifestations hadn't been rage, but urgency. A husband pounding on the walls of a dream, trying to wake the woman he loved before she trapped herself forever between worlds. Yet knowing the truth didn't make it easier to accept. Part of her clung desperately to the phantom ache in her ribs, to the memory of chamomile tea, to the illusion of breath. To accept death meant stepping into something unknowable, perhaps into nothing at all. Then she felt it. Not the violent pressure that had stalked the house, but something calm, patient. She looked up. Liam stood in the dissolving doorway. Not broken, not furious, just Liam, whole, familiar, at peace. He extended his hand, his eyes filled with a compassion so deep it hurt to look at. "It's time," he said. His voice was exactly as she remembered it, steady, certain, safe. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know," he answered gently, "but I'm here. I've always been here, just waiting for you." She looked around the bathroom one last time, seeing it clearly now, not as a place, but as a memory made solid by her refusal to let go. The glass beneath her feet glittered like stars as she stood. She took his hand. His touch was warm, solid, undeniably real. More real than anything she had felt since the accident. And as the world she had built finally began to dissolve, she stepped forward with him, out of fear, out of illusion, and into whatever waited beyond. The house, her grief, her elaborate illusion, all of it dissolved like mist in the morning sun. "Where are we going?" she asked, watching the familiar rooms of Elm Ridge Road melt away. "Forward," Liam said, his voice stretching across a distance that felt both immense and intimate. Finally, forward. Epilogue. The house on Elm Ridge Road remained empty for 3 months before the bank foreclosed and put it back on the market. Jennifer Walsh oversaw the sale with professional efficiency, though she could never fully explain why the basement foundation bore a carved warning. "Get out before you join me." The new owners, a young couple with twin daughters and a golden retriever, sanded the words away and painted over them before moving in. They reported nothing unusual, no strange sounds, no fleeting presences, nothing to suggest the house still remembered what had occurred within its walls. Life returned to the house in ordinary, joyful ways. Bicycle races on the driveway, birthday parties in the backyard, the comfortable chaos of a family building new memories where love and loss had once intertwined. But on some October evenings, when the light takes on that brittle, fragile quality hinting at winter's approach, neighbors sometimes catch a glimpse of 2 figures walking hand in hand down Elm Ridge Road. They vanish when observed directly, leaving behind only the faintest hint of movement and the lingering scent of oregano carried on the crisp autumn wind. The intersection where the accident occurred was eventually redesigned. Better sight lines, a longer yellow light. A small memorial garden now blooms at the corner, maintained by the city and funded by an anonymous donor who sends flowers each year on the anniversary of the crash. The oregano there blooms late, its fragrance lingering long into the frost. Traffic flows through the intersection with the usual casual indifference, drivers focused on their destinations. Yet occasionally, the air seems to pause. A stillness hints at something beyond the physical, a quiet reminder that love, once given freely, echoes far beyond the limits of life and death. It is not haunting, but blessing. In the end, that is the truth that matters, not the logistics of survival, not the struggle to let go, but the simple, immutable fact that connection, once forged, transcends the boundaries of flesh, time, and grief. Liam and Ara discovered this truth in their own way, guided by love through the labyrinth of denial, fear, and sorrow that grief weaves around the human heart. The house remembers them still, but gently now, without urgency, without desperation. And sometimes, when the October wind carries the scent of herbs and sunlight slants through the windows just so, the new occupants pause mid-task and smile without knowing why. They feel it, the echo of a love that in the end learned to let go while holding fast to what truly mattered. The weight of silence, once heavy and suffocating, has become something altogether different. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of peace, settling over the rooms like dust motes dancing in afternoon sunlight. Beautiful in its impermanence, perfect in its acceptance of the natural rhythm of all things.